out some of those statistics. When you began, you've accomplished quite a lot. You've championed sustainability, and I want to thank you for that. A couple of things that you mentioned, though, I'd like to talk about a little more in detail because they kind of fit with FEMA and what we've been discussing in that subcommittee. When you assess the damage that's been done by flooding or tornadoes or hurricanes, and then you determine what changes we need to make to rebuild, can you tell us a little more about that process and how you are working towards making us more resilient? Because we've found in the past, we just keep making the same mistake over and over again, and you keep building right back where it's going to be flooded or destroyed, and that just doesn't make good sense.
Thank you. Yes, we have changed in the last several years our processes for the initial selection of capital projects to require a comprehensive look at the site, the longevity, the expected life of the asset, and what's likely to happen at that particular site. And of course, that's very geographically specific. In addition, we're looking at making sure that all of the architects and engineering firms that are working on our projects have the proper credentials to be able to make good evaluations for how to design buildings that would last for the service life. And that includes looking at strengthening the enclosure, ensuring that the services can continue to operate, examining with the intended tenant of the building how we will react to a disaster, whether there are retreat options, what other backup facilities there will, and including looking at supply chain effects. We worked with one agency where we discovered that they could do everything in a storm, relocate elsewhere, and operate except for one little problem. They didn't have the bandwidth on their contract for electrical service, for Wi-Fi services. So looking at a comprehensive view of what we might do in different circumstances is the key. And in the case of rebuilding, obviously our first, after a disaster, our first goal is to get the government up and running, but then to look at the existing facilities and apply exactly the same criteria to them as we rebuild moving forward.
Well, I know we had $92 million for damages after the Hurricane Florence, and that's just for the federal building, so we want to be sure that money is put to good use.
Yes, and in fact, we're looking in that particular case to the most expensive thing that we experience is flooding, and this is the flooding result. So we're looking at making different decisions about how to protect the existing structures despite their presence in low-lying areas, so that we can either shed the water or make sure that it gets in and out more carefully. Moving, for example, electrical connections up higher so that they're not in the basement, and solutions like that.
Thank you. Another question I have is we often talk about what we do to the building itself, how to make it sustainable or energy efficient, but some of it has to do with locating the building. In many places around the country outside of Washington, the location of a federal building has to do with development in that area. So how do we go about locating a building where it's close to transportation or helps a neighborhood or is close to the workforce? And once you decide the general area, how do you locate the building so that it's able to take advantage of the sunlight, for example?
That's it's obviously a very local decision across the country. We look at the presence of transportation. We look at how people get to and from building. That's part of our common evaluation. In places with no local transportation, we look at road services and the other ways that people can get to the building and how they can commute. That's part of the decision. We also look at how it is that we can, in building a new building, we have very strong daylighting requirements within the building. And in renovating old buildings, we're able to do that. In the chairman's district, the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt building, when the facade was replaced, we were able to have the building be daylit all day long in the entire occupied part of the building, including some areas of the basement that then has historically been cut off from light. Stop there.
So those are considerations that you would make with every building, both in new buildings and in renovated buildings. Well, thank you. I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair.